The wind had teeth, and it was chewing on the canvas roof of the stagecoach. Marlene Duval, who now called herself Eliza Hale, kept her head bowed. She had learned to do this. She had learned to make herself small, to round her shoulders, to study the cracks in her own lap rather than meet the gaze of strangers. She was a woman running, and women who ran learned to look like shadows, lest they be mistaken for prey. It was 1882. The name Duval was poison back in New Orleans, a name spit from marble porticos and whispered over crystal glasses, a name synonymous with arsenic, betrayal, and a dead husband. Here, in the raw, unfinished spine of the Montana Territory. She was just Mrs. Hale, a widow in a plain, gray wool dress, her last remaining piece of quality jewelry, a simple gold locket hidden beneath the fabric. The coach, a mud-splattered Concorde, smelled of stale sweat, unwashed bodies, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. Her fellow passengers were ghosts to her. A drummer with a cheap valise, his eyes lingering too long on her face. A gaunt woman clutching a sleeping baby. A silent man in a dusty bowler hat who looked like he had seen too much. Marlene, or Eliza, as she must remember, had not spoken more than 10 words since leaving Cheyenne. Words were currency, and she was bankrupt. Her entire world had been reduced to the grit on the window ledge and the violent lurch of the wheels. She was heading west, a direction that had no meaning other than away. Away from the accusations, the trial she had fled, the faces of her husband's family, twisted in a mask of victorious grief. They had wanted her gone, and now she was... The territory outside was a revelation of emptiness. It was not the lush, heavy green of Louisiana. This was a land of brown and gray, of vast, aching skies and mountains that looked like broken teeth. It was a place that did not care if you lived or died. It was, she thought with a shiver, the perfect place to disappear. The stage slowed, its heavy frame groaning in protest. They were pulling into a small, desolate way station at the mouth of a mountain pass. It was nothing more than a crude log hut and a lean-to stable. The driver, a man whose face was a map of windburn, called out, 10 minutes. Stretch your legs if you got 'em. Keep sight of the coach. Marlene felt a knot of apprehension. These stops were the worst. They were exposed. She pulled her thin cloak tighter. It was a poor replacement for the fine cashmere she had sold in Denver. The cold here was different. It was not a damp chill. It was a dry, clean blade that cut straight to the bone. She stepped down onto the frozen mud. Her one good boot, the other was thin-soled and worn, sinking slightly. The air was so thin it hurt to breathe. The silence was immense, broken only by the snorting of the horses and the creak of the harness. The drummer walked toward the trees to relieve himself. The woman with the baby stayed inside the coach, rocking the child. Marlene walked just a few paces, rubbing her gloved hands together. She looked up at the pass. It was a narrow cut in the rock, dark with shadow, a place where things could hide. She heard it first, not a gunshot, but the sudden, violent thwack of a bullet hitting the coach's heavy oak frame. Then the world exploded. A rifle cracked from the ridge above them. The driver, who had been checking a horse's hoof, straightened up with a look of absurd surprise. A red flower bloomed on his chest. He fell backward without a sound. The woman inside the coach screamed. The man in the bowler hat dove from the opposite door, rolling as he hit the ground. Another shot kicked up dirt where he had been. Marlene froze. Her mind, so sharp in the drawing rooms of New Orleans, went utterly blank. There was only the ringing in her ears and the smell of gunpowder. 3 men rode down from the rocks. They were not grand outlaws. They were just dirty men with long guns and hungry eyes. "The box! Get the damn box!" one of them yelled, his voice raw. He pointed at the drummer, who had his hands raised high. "You get it down!" The drummer, pale and shaking, scrambled to the back of the coach. The man in the bowler hat was gone. vanished into the brush. One of the men, younger than the others, with a sparse, filthy beard, swung down from his horse. His eyes landed on Marlene. She was the only one standing still. She was the only one who looked like she might be worth something. He grinned, showing broken teeth. "Well, now, what have we got here?" He grabbed her arm. His glove was stiff with dried animal blood. The smell of him, unwashed body, cheap whiskey, and something sour made her stomach clench. "Please," she whispered. It was the wrong thing to say. It was a plea, and pleas were for the weak. "Please," he mimicked, his voice a high-pitched whine. He shoved her against the side of the coach. "Where you keeping your coin, little bird? In your boot?" He grabbed her ankle and yanked. Her worn boot came off in his hand. He grunted, turned it upside down, and shook it. Nothing fell out. His gaze traveled up her leg, to the hem of her gray dress. Maybe it's higher up. "Leave her!" the leader yelled from his horse. He was busy watching the drummer fumble with the heavy strongbox. "We ain't got time for that. Jeb." But Jeb was not listening. His eyes were fixed on the slight rise of her chest. "Just want to see what a fine lady looks like under all this wool." His hand, rough and calloused, grabbed the front of her bodice. Marlene cried out and hit him. It was a weak, clumsy blow, and it only made him laugh. He ripped the fabric. The buttons scattered. The cold air hit her skin like a slap, shocking her. Her chemise was thin linen. He tore that, too. She was exposed, not naked, but violated. The chill was immediate, dangerous. He saw the gold locket, glinting. "There it is." He lunged for it. Next, he tore at her cloak, pulling it from her shoulders. It was a prize. He threw it over his saddle. "Get the mailbags," the leader shouted, firing his pistol into the air. The strongbox was on the ground. Jeb, distracted by the order, looked away from Marlene. He still held her ripped bodice in his fist. With a grunt of annoyance, he shoved her. Hard. Marlene stumbled backward, her stockinged foot slipping on a patch of ice. She fell, her head striking the iron-bound rim of the wagon wheel. A flash of white-hot pain, and then a wave of nausea. She heard them laugh. That sound, the high, brutal sound of men's amusement at her pain, would stay with her forever. She was on the ground, in the frozen mud. One of the men threw the mailbags from the roof. They landed near her. The gang was focused on the loot. They had the box, the mail, and her cloak. "Let's ride." They spurred their horses, thundering past her, up into the pass they had just emerged from. They did not look back. She was not worth a bullet. She was just trash, left to freeze. For a long moment, there was only silence. The woman in the coach was sobbing, a hysterical, gulping sound. The driver lay staring at the gray sky. The drummer was gone, having fled after the man in the bowler hat. Marlene pushed herself up onto one elbow. The world spun. Blood, warm and sticky, was running from her hairline into her left eye. She wiped it away, her glove coming back red. She was cold, a deep, penetrating cold that she had never imagined. Her torn dress offered no protection. Her chest was bare to the wind. She tried to pull the ruined fabric together, but her fingers were already numb. They'll come back. The thought was a spike of ice in her gut. Or perhaps the cold was just making her think. She had to move. She looked at her foot. Just a thin wool stocking, already wet. She looked at the woods, dark, full of shadows. She heard a sound, a low groan. The driver was not dead. His eyes were open, pleading. Marlene crawled to him. "Help!" he whispered. His lips were blue. She looked at the wound. It was hopeless. She knew nothing of wounds, but she knew this. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She was apologizing for her helplessness, for her life. His eyes closed. The woman in the coach was still screaming. Marlene looked inside. The baby was crying, a thin, reedy wail. The woman was rocking back and forth, her hands over her face. She was useless. Marlene knew, with a terrible, cold certainty, that they would die if they stayed here. The way station was miles from the last town. No one would come before nightfall, and with nightfall would come the wolves. And the cold, the killing cold. She had to move. She grabbed the collar of her ripped dress and held it closed with one hand. She tried to stand. Her ankle, the one without the boot, twisted under her. She cried out, a small, sharp sound. It was badly sprained. She began to crawl. She left the coach, the dead driver, and the screaming woman behind. She crawled toward the trees, toward the dark line of pines that marked the edge of the wilderness. She moved away from the road, away from the pass where the outlaws had gone. She did not know where she was going. She was just moving. Every movement was agony. The frozen ground was sharp with stones and twigs. Her good hand, the one not holding her dress, was raw in minutes. She pushed herself forward, dragging her useless leg. Then she heard it again. Faint, on the wind, the echo of laughter. Were they coming back? Or was it just the memory already branded into her? Panic gave her a strength she did not possess. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the fire in her ankle. She half ran, half fell, limping deeper into the forest. She did not know that she was climbing. The ground rose steeply. She used her hands to pull herself up, grabbing at brush and saplings. The brambles tore at her remaining clothes, at her skin. She left small, dark drops of blood on the snow-dusted leaves. She fell into a gully, sliding down a muddy bank into a stream. The water was not frozen solid, but it was a liquid cold that seemed to stop her heart. It was perhaps only a foot deep, but it felt like an ocean. It soaked her from the waist down. She screamed, a ragged gasp that the wind stole from her lips. The shock was so profound, so complete, that for a second she thought she would simply lie down and die. But the fear was stronger. She clawed her way up the opposite bank. The wet wool of her skirt and petticoats weighed a ton. It froze almost instantly as the air hit it, turning to a stiff, icy armor. She kept moving. She did not know for how long. The sun was a pale wafer, dropping fast toward the jagged line of the mountains. The world was shades of blue and gray. The wind was a voice, whispering, "Die, die, die." Her stockinged foot was gone. She could not feel it. It was just a block of wood she dragged. Her hands were clumsy, bloody things. The gash on her forehead had stopped bleeding, the blood frozen to her skin. She fell. This time, she did not try to get up. She curled into a ball at the base of a great pine, pulling her knees to her chest. She was shaking so violently her teeth ached. It was not so bad, she thought, her mind beginning to drift. It was quiet. The wind had died down. It was almost peaceful. She thought of New Orleans. She thought of the smell of jasmine and the warm, damp air of the bayou. She thought of her husband, his cold eyes, the relief she felt when he was dead. She had not poisoned him, but she had wished him dead. In the eyes of God, she was just as guilty. This was her judgment. To die alone, in the dirt, in a land that did not even know her name. She closed her eyes. Colt Hardin did not like people. People were a complication, like a sprung trap or a dull knife. They brought noise and expectation and, worst of all, betrayal. His world was the river, the pines, and the snow. He ran a trap line 20 miles long, collecting beaver, mink, and fox pelts. He traded them once every 3 months at a post 70 miles south, a place he tolerated for the hour it took to get coffee, salt, and ammunition. His shack was built into the side of a hill, invisible until you were 50 feet from it. It was small, tight, and warm. It smelled of wood smoke, cured hides, and coffee. It was his. He was checking a trap near the river bend when he found her. At first, he thought it was a deer, a small doe, huddled against the cold. Then he saw the gray of the dress. He stopped, his hand instantly going to the hunting knife on his belt. He listened. The woods were silent. He scanned the trees, his eyes sharp. No tracks, other than the ones this thing had made. He approached slowly. He saw the bare, bloody hands, the matted hair. He saw the pale curve of her shoulder where the dress was torn. He saw the stockinged foot, dark and swollen. He nudged her with the toe of his boot. "Ma'am?" She did not move. He knelt, his rifle still in his left hand. He put his gloved fingers against her neck, under her jaw. A pulse, faint, thready, but it was there. He cursed, not loudly, but with a deep, weary bitterness. This was trouble. This was the world intruding. He looked at her face. It was smeared with blood and dirt, but he could see the fine line of her jaw, the delicate shape of her nose. This was not a settler woman. This was quality. Quality did not belong here. Quality meant pauses and questions and men with guns. He should leave her. It was the smart thing to do. The woods would take her by morning. It was the law of this place. But he had seen her pulse. He sighed, the sound a cloud of white in the frozen air. Damnation. He holstered his knife and slung his rifle over his shoulder. He was a strong man, built of corded muscle from a life of hard labor. He slid one arm under her knees and the other under her back. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of sticks and wet, frozen rags. He lifted her. She made a small sound, a bare sigh, and her head lolled against his chest. He began the 2-mile walk back to his shack, his long, even strides eating up the ground. He did not hurry. He did not cradle her. He just carried her, a piece of unwelcome cargo. He kicked the door of his shack open and carried her inside. The single room was warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Pelts were stretched on frames, hanging from the rafters. A narrow cot was in one corner, a rough table in the other. He laid her on the bearskin rug in front of the fire. Not on his cot. The cot was his. He stood over her for a moment. Just looking, she was a mess. Her left foot was turning a dark, mottled color. Frostbite. Bad. He went to the hearth and pulled the kettle from the hook. He poured warm water into a basin. He grabbed a strip of clean linen from a box. He knelt beside her. He was methodical. He did not think of her as a woman. He thought of her as a problem to be solved, like a broken leg on a horse. He cut her boot off her good foot. It was soaked. Then he handled the bad one. He had to cut the stocking away. It was frozen to the skin. The flesh underneath was waxy and pale. He soaked the linen in the warm water and gently, roughly, began to clean the blood and grime from her face. The gash on her forehead was shallow, but it had bled a lot. It was already closing, sealed by the cold. He pulled her dress, or what was left of it, straight. He saw the torn bodice, the exposed skin. He felt nothing. He pulled a thick wool blanket from his cot and threw it over her, covering her from chin to feet. He sat back on his heels. What now? He would wait. If she woke, she could talk. She could explain. If she did not, well, that was that. He stoked the fire, adding 2 thick logs. Then he went to his chair by the small, clouded window, picked up his rifle, and began to clean it. He laid it across his lap, oiled the action, and watched her. He did not trust her, and he did not trust whatever had put her here. His rifle. He trusted. Marlene woke to warmth. The sensation was so alien, so wrong, that it terrified her. She was supposed to be cold. She was supposed to be dying. Her eyes snapped open. She was in a small, dark room, a room made of logs. A fire was burning. She was on the floor, on a thick fur, and she was covered by a heavy, scratchy blanket that smelled of wood smoke and man. She sat up too fast. The world tilted. The gash on her head throbbed. Easy. The voice came from the shadows. It was deep and rough as gravel. She turned. A man was sitting in a chair, not 10 feet away. He was large, larger than he seemed sitting down. The firelight caught the barrel of the rifle lying across his lap. She scrambled backward, pulling the blanket with her, until her back hit the rough log wall. Her heart was a trapped bird against her ribs. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice a cracked whisper. "My shack." He did not move. He just watched her. His face was in shadow, but she could see the dark shape of a beard. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Found you by the river. You were mostly froze." He gestured with his chin. "You'll lose some toes. I reckon maybe the foot." She looked down. She could not see her feet under the blanket. She tried to wiggle her toes. She could feel her right foot. Her left, nothing, just a dead, heavy weight. The memory of the attack, the cold, the stream, came rushing back. The laughter. She screamed. It was not a loud scream, but a high, thin, terrible sound of pure animal terror. It filled the small cabin. The man was on his feet in one motion. He crossed the room in 2 strides and loomed over her. "You stop that," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You stop that right now, or you go back out. I'll not have that noise here. It brings wolves. It brings worse." He was terrifying. But Marlene had been terrified by men in fine suits in bright rooms. She had nothing left to lose. She glared up at him, her hair wild and matted, her face bruised. She pulled the blanket tighter. "You'll regret it," she hissed, the words tasting like blood in her mouth. "You'll regret choosing to help me." He stared down at her. The firelight now caught the side of his face. She saw it. From just below his left ear, running down his jaw and disappearing into the collar of his shirt, was a scar. It was not a clean knife cut. It was a ruin, a thick, ropey, puckered landscape of burned flesh that pulled his skin tight, giving him a permanent, grim sneer on one side of his mouth. He saw where she was looking. His face, the good side, hardened into something colder than the ice she had woken from. He growled, a sound from deep in his chest. "I already do." He turned his back on her and went back to his chair. He picked up the rifle. He did not toss her out. He did not move from his post. He just sat, a dark sentinel in the corner, leaving her to tremble by the fire. The silence stretched, broken only by the snap of the logs and the rising howl of the wind outside. A storm was hitting. After an hour, he spoke, his voice quiet. "What happened?" She did not answer. "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Eliza. Hale, my husband is dead." "Stagecoach?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Ambushed. They took everything." He nodded slowly. "Happens. You were lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you see it." He fell silent again. Marlene watched him. He seemed carved from the same hard, unforgiving material as the mountains outside. "And you?" she finally asked, her voice stronger. "Who are you?" Colt Harden. "Do you live here alone?" "I do." He offered nothing more, but the cabin told its own story. There was one chair, one cot, one tin plate, one cup. It was a place of absolute, deliberate solitude. She shivered, though she was warm. The cold was inside her now. "You said you were burned." Her voice was barely audible. She was not sure why she said it. Perhaps it was to show him she was not afraid, or perhaps seeing his ruin. She felt a kinship with her own. He flinched. His hand tightened on the rifle. He turned his head slowly, and this time he let the firelight hit him full on. "That's right," he said, his voice flat and dead. "I was a ranch foreman, down in the Wyoming territory. Trusted the wrong man, a man named Boone Slater. Thought he was a friend. He wanted the land I'd proved up, framed me for theft. Got the other hands drunk and riled. They held me down." He paused, and his good eyes seemed to look through her, at something far away. "He did this, with a branding iron. Then they left me in the line shack, barred the door, set it on fire. left a bottle of whiskey by my side, so the sheriff would find a drunk who'd burned himself up. Marlene stared, horrified. The cruelty was beyond her comprehension. I got out, he said simply. Through the floor. Took me a year to heal, or heal as much as I was going to. My name was ruined, branded a thief. So I came here, where there's no names. He looked at her, his gaze sharp and piercing. Everyone's running from something. Mrs. Hale. Difference is, some of us get marked for it. He gestured to his face, then to her. She looked away, shame washing over her. He was right. She was marked. To her name, her reputation, they were as ruined as his face. Outside, the wind shrieked. It was no longer a howl. It was a physical assault. Snow began to hiss against the small window. Colt stood and went to the door. He peered out through a crack. When he turned back, his face was grim. Blizzard, a bad one. We're locked in. Could be 2 days. Could be a week. He looked at the small stack of wood by the fire, then at the sack of flour in the corner. Supplies are low. I was due for a run. He looked at her, his new unwanted burden, curled up on his floor. He did not need to say it. They were trapped. 2 broken people, in a tiny box, with a killing storm outside and a dwindling fire within. And in the dark, in the suffocating closeness, their respective ghosts began to churn, waking from the cold. The blizzard was not a storm. It was a siege. For 3 days, the world was reduced to the 4 log walls of the cabin and the screaming, white fury outside. The wind hit the small structure with the force of a physical blow, and snow sifted through invisible cracks, piling in pale, delicate drifts under the door and on the single window ledge. Marlene, calling herself Eliza, felt her body begin to mend in the suffocating warmth. The gash on her forehead was a dull, pulling ache. Her ankle was a swollen, purple ruin, and her frost-bitten foot was agony. Colt had examined it with a grim, impersonal air. "You'll keep the foot," he'd grunted, packing it with a poultice of snow and herbs that stung terribly. "The small toes are gone. They'll blacken and fall off. Be grateful it ain't the whole thing." She was grateful. She was grateful for the fire, for the thick wool socks he had given her, for the roof. But gratitude was a heavy, awkward burden. She was indebted to a man who clearly wished she was anywhere else. Colt Hardin moved with a silent, restless energy. He was a man accustomed to solitude, and her presence was a grit in his eye. He rationed the wood, his face tight. He checked the dwindling supplies. A half-full sack of flour, a small tin of coffee, a hunk of salted venison, a few withered potatoes in a crate. He never looked at her. His eyes, she noticed, were a pale, piercing gray, the color of the ice on the river, but they never met hers. He would look at the wall just over her shoulder, or at the fire as he spoke to her. It was a deliberate, pointed shunning. She was a thing he had dragged inside, and he would keep her alive. But he would not see her. On the second day, the gnawing idleness became too much. Her ankle could bear a little weight. She pulled herself up, using the wall for balance. "What are you doing?" he asked, his back to her. He was sharpening his skinning knife. The shing-shing-shing of the whetstone was the only sound beside the wind. "I cannot just sit. I must help." He did not turn. "There's nothing to help with." I can cook, if you have food." He gestured with his head toward the crate. "Taters and a bit of meat. Don't waste the salt." She limped to the hearth. It was a disaster. She, Marlene Duval, who had overseen a kitchen staff of 6, who could identify a dozen different French sauces by smell alone, had no idea how to cook in a fireplace. She fumbled with the heavy iron pot, nearly dropping it. She peeled the potatoes with his hunting knife, her movements clumsy, taking off far too much of the flesh. She hacked at the venison. She boiled it all in a pot of water, creating a gray, flavorless, stringy stew. She served him a bowl, her hand shaking. He took it, looked at it, and ate it. He did not complain, but he did not praise it either. He just ate, his expression as blank as the snow outside. His silence was a worse condemnation than any insult. The next day, she tried to help with the wood. He kept a small pile inside to stay dry. He was splitting a log, the thunk of the axe a solid, satisfying rhythm. "Let me," she said, reaching for the small hatchet. He stopped, his arm raised. For the first time, he looked directly at her. His gaze was withering. "You? I can learn." He sighed, a sound of profound exasperation, and handed it to her. "Don't take your other foot off." She placed a small log on the splitting block. She lifted the hatchet. It was heavier than it looked. She brought it down, missed the center, and the hatchet head glanced off the wood, burying itself in the dirt floor inches from her good foot. Colt snatched it from her hand. "Enough. You're done. Go sit. You're more trouble than you're worth." Tears of pure frustration and shame stung her eyes. She turned away quickly, so he would not see. "I am not useless," she whispered to the wall. "You are here," he said, his voice flat. He went back to splitting wood. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Each blow of the axe felt like a judgment. He was strong, capable, alive. She was weak, inept, a burden. She had been raised to be an ornament, and in a place like this, ornaments were the first things to be broken and discarded. The third morning, she woke before him. The storm had lessened, the wind dropping to a low, mournful moan. The cabin was frigid. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Colt was asleep on his cot, fully dressed, his back to her. He had given her the bearskin rug and 2 blankets. He slept under one, his rifle beside him. She crept to the hearth to add a log, her movements stiff, and then she saw him. He was not asleep. He was sitting up on the edge of the cot. He had stripped off his heavy wool shirt to wash. A tin basin of water was on the floor beside him. In the pale, gray light of dawn, she saw his back. She had seen the scar on his neck, but she had not been prepared for this. The ruin did not stop at his jaw. It spread. The fire had taken him from the left side. The brand on his jaw was a puckered, angry knot. But below it, his entire shoulder, the side of his neck, and a wide, terrible swath across his chest and down his ribs was a landscape of melted, twisted flesh. The skin was pulled tight, slick and unnaturally smooth in some places, knotted and thick as rope in others. It was a miracle he could move his arm. She did not mean to make a sound. It was just a small, sharp intake of breath. A gasp. He heard it. He moved faster than she could have imagined. In one motion, he grabbed his shirt and spun around. Standing to face her, he was cornered, exposed, and his face was a mask of pure, primal fury. "Get your eyes off me," he hissed. But she could not. She was frozen. Her eyes were fixed on the damage, and her face, to her own horror, crumpled. Not in disgust. It was not disgust. It was a profound, aching pity. She saw not the monster, but the man, and the unimaginable pain he must have endured. That look of pity was the one thing he could not bear. "I said stop looking at me," he roared, taking a step toward her. "You like what you see? Does it make you feel better about your own troubles? Go on. Have a good look." He stood there, defiant and shaking with shame, his chest exposed in the cold light. He was daring her to recoil, waiting for her to show the disgust he had seen 100 times before. Marlene swallowed. The tears were there, but she would not let them fall. She did not back away. She did not flinch. She held his furious, pale gray gaze. She raised her chin. Her voice was soft, but it cut through his anger like a clean blade. "I am sorry, Mr. Hardin," she said. His face twisted. "I don't need your pity." "That is not what I am offering," she said, her voice gaining strength. I am sorry for the pain it must have caused you. I am sorry that men can be so cruel." She paused, then added, "And I am sorry for staring. It was rude, but I will not pretend I did not see it, and I will not pretend it is not a part of you." His fury wavered. He stared at her, breathing hard, his good hand clenched at his side. This was not the reaction he expected. There was no scream, no revulsion, no averted, trembling gaze. She was just looking at him, as if he were still a man. He searched her face for a long moment, looking for the lie, for the fear. He found none. Slowly, the tension drained out of his shoulders. He turned away from her, not in anger, but in a quiet, defeated gesture. He pulled his shirt on, his movements stiff. He fumbled with the buttons, his left hand clumsy from the tightened skin. Without a word, he picked up the water basin, opened the cabin door, and threw the water out into the snow. The new, cold air rushed in, and for a moment, it cleared the suffocating air between them. When he turned back, his face was locked down, impassive as ever. But he did not go back to his chair. He walked to the hearth, near where she stood. He looked at the fire. "The wind's droppin'," he said. It was the first moment of thaw. The storm had broken them both, in its own way. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer an angry, defensive silence. It was a shared, quiet space. That night they talked. It did not come in a rush, but in fragments, like pieces of wreckage washing ashore. "You said your husband, he was not kind," Colt said to the fire, his voice low. Marlene was patching his other shirt, her stitches small and neat. It was one thing she could do. No, he was not. She paused, the needle hovering. "My name is not Eliza Hale. It is Marlene Duval." Colt said nothing. The name meant nothing to him. And that, she realized, was a profound relief. "I married Gaspard Duval when I was 18. My family had lost its money. The war, it was a good match. They said—" She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Gaspard was 40, a powerful man in New Orleans. He owned ships, he owned people, and he believed he owned me. She described the house, a beautiful prison of marble and silk, the dinners, the expectations, the suffocating weight of his possessiveness. "He was cruel," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not with his fists, not at first, with words, with silence. He liked to control things, me, his business, his family. He was cold, and he was angry that I gave him no children, as if it were a failing I had chosen, to spite him." Colt listened, his face in shadow. He was feeding small chips of wood into the fire, making the meager supply last. "He died at a dinner party," she said, her voice flat. "He drank his brandy. He stood up to make a toast, and he clutched his throat. His face turned blue. He fell. It was arsenic." "And they looked at you," Colt said. It was not a question. She nodded, her eyes burning. "His family, they had always hated me, the poor, barren girl from a failed line. It was too perfect. I had bought rat poison just 2 days earlier. For the cellars. The servants knew. I had wished him dead. Mr. Harden, 1,000 times. In my heart. But I did not do it." "Why run?" he asked. "If you were innocent." "Innocent?" She looked at him, her gaze sharp. "You were innocent. Did it matter? They owned the judge. They owned the newspapers. His sister. She swore she saw me arguing with him that afternoon, that I had threatened him. It was a lie, but it was her word against mine, and my word was worthless. I was to stand trial, but it was not a trial. It was a performance, a hanging. So I took what jewelry I had, and I ran." Colt was very still. He understood a rigged game. He understood being branded by a lie. "Boone Slater," he said, his voice a low rumble. He was my friend. We rode together for 5 years. I'd have taken a bullet for him. I did take a bullet for him. Once, in a skirmish up on the Powder River. He told his story again, but this time it was not the story of a foreman and a boss. It was the story of a brother. He had a laugh. You could hear it a mile off. We were going to build a ranch, the biggest in the territory. We'd filed on adjoining parcels. Mine had the water rights for the whole valley. That was the key. He stopped. He picked up the poker and jabbed at the logs, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. He changed, or maybe he was always that way, and I was just a fool. He brought in hard men, hired guns, said it was for protection against rustlers. Then the money from a cattle sale went missing. From my saddlebag, where he'd put it himself, said he needed me to hold it, and he was the one who found it, in front of all the men he'd just hired. He stared into the flames, his good eyes seeing the past. He called me a thief, a liar. I tried to fight, but it was 10 against 1. They held me, and Boone, he did the branding himself. He said, "Liars get the iron, Colt, so everyone knows what you are." "The fire," Marlene whispered. He wanted the land, my claim. A dead man can't fight a filing. They left me in the barn. They barred the door. And he left that bottle of whiskey. His voice was raw. That was the worst part. Not the fire, the whiskey. So everyone would think I was just a drunk who'd passed out. He wasn't just killing me. He was erasing me, stealing my whole life, my name, everything I'd ever been. They sat in silence. The wind had finally, truly died. The quiet of the snow-covered world was absolute. "They call you a murderer," Colt said, his voice so quiet she barely heard it. "And they call you a thief," she replied. He looked at her, his gray eyes clear and steady. "We are a pair." The cold in the cabin was now a creeping, dangerous thing. The fire was their only defense, but the woodpile was almost gone. The temperature dropped with the setting sun, and the walls seemed to radiate ice. Marlene was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that rattled her bones. Her bad foot was a solid block of fire and ice. Colt threw the last blanket on her, but it did nothing. He stood by the hearth, watching her. He was torn. She could see the war in his face. His solitude was his armor. Letting her in was a violation of his one hard rule. Finally, he cursed, low and bitter. "You'll die of it. You'll shake yourself apart." He walked to the cot. "Move over." She stared, uncomprehending. "What?" "Move over." He gestured, impatient. "You're on the inside, against the wall." She scrambled to obey, her heart pounding. The cot was narrow, barely wide enough for one man. She pressed herself against the cold logs, pulling her knees up. He did not get under the blankets. He lay down on top of them, his back to her, a rigid, unmoving wall of muscle. He was fully dressed, right down to his boots. "Go to sleep," he growled. But sleep was impossible. She was acutely aware of him, his scent, the sheer, solid presence of him. He did not touch her, not by an inch, but his body heat was a tangible thing, a barrier between her and the killing cold. She lay awake for hours, stiff as a board, listening to him breathe. The next night was worse. The cold was deeper. The fire was just embers. He lay down again, this time with a muttered oath, and pulled the top blanket over both of them. He still lay on top of his own blanket, a barrier between them. But the shared warmth was immediate. They lay in the dark, facing each other, not touching. They were inches apart. She could see the faint outline of his face, the dark shape of the scar. "You'll regret it," she whispered into the darkness. The words she had spoken in her terror, she now spoke in her shame. "You'll regret choosing me. I am poison, Mr. Harden. Everything I touch, it rots. My family, my husband. Now, you. I've brought you nothing but trouble." He was silent for a long time. She thought he was asleep. When he spoke, his voice was a low, rough growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Not when you touch me there." She did not understand. "What?" He did not move. He just watched her in the dark. "The scar. You look at it, you talk about it, but you won't touch it. You're like all the rest, afraid it'll rub off on you." It was a challenge, a raw, desperate, painful challenge. He was testing her, daring her to prove her words. Her hand was under the blanket, tucked against her own chest for warmth. Slowly, she moved it. The space between them felt like a mile. She was terrified. Not of him, of failing. She lifted her hand. It was shaking. She laid her palm, carefully, respectfully, flat against his chest, right over the worst of the scarred, knotted tissue. He did not flinch. He did not breathe. He just was. Her fingers were cold, but his skin, even the ruined skin, was warm. It was not slick or monstrous. It was just him. It was skin. She did not caress it. She did not pity it. She just held her hand there. A simple, accepting pressure. An acknowledgement. "I see you, and I am still here." He let out a breath, a long, shuddering sigh that he seemed to have been holding since the fire. He moved. He closed the small distance between them. His good hand, calloused and rough, came up to cup her jaw. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. And then he kissed her. It was not the kiss of a brute. It was not the kiss of a hungry, lonely man. It was the most tender, hesitant, and profoundly sad kiss she had ever known. His lips were chapped, his beard rough, but the pressure was soft, questioning. It was not about lust, it was about acceptance. It was a sealing of their pact, a shared breath in the dark. She kissed him back, her eyes closing, a single hot tear escaping to trace a path through the grime on her cheek. It was a kiss of shared grief, of two ruined people, finding a single solid point of truth in the darkness. He pulled back, just an inch. He rested his forehead against hers. "Marlene," he whispered, tasting her real name for the first time. The storm was over. On the 5th morning, they woke to a world of blinding white and absolute silence. The snow was piled 5 feet deep against the door. Colt dug them out. It took 2 hours of hard, grim work when he finally broke through. The new sun on the endless white was so bright it was painful. Marlene stood in the doorway, bundled in his spare coat. Squinting, the world was new, reborn, clean. Colt grabbed his rifle. "I'm checking the line. What traps I got left? Don't wander." He strode off, his tall frame a dark figure against the white, his snowshoes making a soft shush-shush sound. He was gone for hours. When he returned, his face was a hard, grim mask she had not seen since before the thaw. He said nothing. He walked past her, hung his rifle on the peg, and began to stoke the fire. "Colt?" she asked. "What is it? Did you find the coach?" "No." He turned, his gray eyes flat and cold. "We weren't alone in the storm." He gestured to the door. "Found tracks, not more than a day old, down by the river bend, near where I found you." "Wolves?" "No," he said, his voice dropping. "Boot prints. One man. He walked right up to the cabin, stood there, watched." Marlene felt the blood drain from her face. "Watched?" "Stood by that big pine out west. Stood there for a long time. Then he walked away, back toward the pass." The siege was over, but the world, the one she was running from, had found her. The boot prints were a cancer in the clean white snow. They stopped 100 yards from the cabin, behind a thicket of pine. The man had stood there a long time. The snow was packed down, littered with tobacco spits. He had watched them. He had watched the smoke rise from the chimney. He had watched Colt chop wood. He had perhaps even seen Marlene's shadow pass the window. "One man," Colt said, his voice flat. He kicked snow over the tracks, a useless gesture of defiance. "A scout, from the gang." Marlene, standing on the cabin's patched threshold, pulled his heavy wool coat tighter around her. The cold was no longer just a physical threat. It was a human one. "What does he want?" To see how many we are, how armed. He'll go back. He'll tell his friends. They'll wait." "Wait for what?" Colt looked at her, his gray eyes hard. "For the thaw, for us to get careless, or for their nerve to come back. They know you're here, a woman, alone with one man. They might think I have the rest of the loot from the coach, or they might just be bored." The casual brutality of his words made her stomach clench. This was his world, a world where boredom was a reason to kill. He strode past her, back into the cabin. The small, warm space had been a sanctuary. Now it felt like a trap. He reached under his cot and pulled out a rifle. It was shorter than the one he carried. A Winchester carbine, its wooden stock dark and oiled. He tossed a small, heavy box of cartridges onto the table. "No," he said, anticipating her. "You don't get to be helpless. Not anymore." "Colt, I cannot," she whispered, staring at the gun as if it were a snake. I have never held one. And that's why you're here. That's why you were crawling in the mud with your dress torn. Because you never held one." He was not angry. He was calm. And that calm was more terrifying than his rage. He was a man preparing for a war, and he would not tolerate a civilian in his trench. "I cannot take a life," she said, her voice shaking. I am not like them." He stopped, his hand on the rifle, and looked at her. It was a long, patient, and weary look. "This ain't about taking a life, Marlene. It's about keeping yours. You think that man, the one who left his boot prints, you think he's worried about taking a life? You think that filth, Jeb, who put his hands on you, you think he'll have a moment of Christian doubt?" She flinched, the memory of that day vivid and sour. "He will not," Colt continued, his voice a low, hard rumble. "He will take what he wants, and he will toss you aside, just like he did before, only this time, he'll be more thorough. This time, he won't leave you breathing." He pushed the rifle into her hands. The weight of it shocked her. It was heavy, solid, cold, a tool of pure, terrible purpose. "Outside." He took her 50 yards from the cabin, to a place where a fallen log lay against a small rise. He jammed a broken piece of shingle into the snow on top of the log. "That's your target." He showed her how to work the lever action, the smooth, mechanical shuck-shuck as the fresh cartridge slid into the chamber, how to hold the stock tight against her shoulder. "Tighter. You let it be loose. It'll break your collarbone. You let it know you're its boss." She resisted. Her body was stiff. This was a violation of every principle she had ever known. A lady did not handle firearms. A lady was protected. She was learning, with a cold, sinking dread, that there was no one to protect her but the scarred man beside her, and he could not be everywhere at once. "Aim," he commanded. She raised the rifle. It wavered. Her arms ached. "Don't pull the trigger, Marlene. Squeeze it, slow, like you're squeezing a lemon. Surprise yourself." She closed her eyes and yanked the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The rifle kicked like a mule, slamming into her shoulder and sending a shock of pain up her neck. She cried out, stumbling backward. The shingle was untouched. The bullet had gone wide by a yard. "Again." His voice was flat. "It hurt," she complained, tears of pain and frustration in her eyes. "It'll hurt more when they're dragging you out of the cabin. Again. And keep your damn eyes open. What's coming for you won't close its eyes." She hated him for it. She hated his coldness, his practicality, his refusal to let her be weak. She loaded. She aimed. Her arms shook. She kept her eyes open, staring at the small piece of wood. She squeezed. Boom! The kick. She missed. Again. Boom! Miss. Again. Settle your breathing. Let it all out. Then squeeze. She was crying now. Silent. Angry tears freezing on her cheeks. She was cold. Her shoulder was a mass of fire. She leveled the rifle. She let out her breath. The world went very still. The target, the sight, her finger. She squeezed. Boom! A small puff of snow erupted from the log, just to the left of the target. Closer, he grunted. Again. She did it again and again. On the 7th shot, the piece of shingle vanished in a spray of splintered wood. The silence that followed was heavy. Marlene lowered the rifle, her entire body trembling. She had done it. She had destroyed something. She looked at Colt. He was not smiling. He was not pleased. He just nodded, a short, grim acknowledgement. Good enough, he said. For now. Now you know how to load it. Keep it by the door. You hear a sound, and I ain't here. You pick it up. You don't ask questions. You don't call out. You aim for the middle of whatever's coming through that door, and you squeeze. He walked back to the cabin, leaving her standing alone in the snow, the smell of gunpowder on her hands, the heavy weight of survival in her arms. The rifle lesson changed things. The shared threat, the grim reality of their situation, settled over the cabin like a second winter, but it did not drive them apart. It forged them. Time passed. A week, 2. The snowpack began to lessen, melting in the pale afternoon sun, then freezing again at night into a treacherous, icy crust. They were suspended between the blizzard and the thaw, in a quiet, shared limbo. They began to work. The cabin had taken a beating. Colt was on the roof, replacing shingles the wind had stolen. Marlene, her ankle now strong enough to limp on, stood below, handing him the hammer. He had found her a pair of sturdy, worn boots in a box of his old gear, packed with rags to make them fit. The first time she handed him the hammer, their hands brushed. It was a simple, practical touch. But he paused, his gloved fingers lingering on hers for just a second. A silent thank you, a silent acknowledgement. Their routine became oddly domestic. It was a life built of shared tasks and quiet understanding. She was no longer the inept woman who had ruined the stew. She learned to bank the fire, to make a passable bread from flour and water, to clean and oil the rifle until it shone. She learned to set snares, a task that made her stomach turn. The first time she brought back a rabbit, she had cried. Colt had taken it from her, his face impassive. "It's meat," he said. "It's life. Don't waste the tears on it." He showed her how to skin it, his movements quick and economical. She had turned away, but the next time, she watched. They were building a life, day by day, shingle by shingle. The silence, once so tense, became comfortable. They would eat their meals, rabbit stew, flatbread, sitting on the floor by the fire. Sometimes an entire hour would pass without a word. There was nothing to say. Everything was understood. And occasionally, there was laughter. It was a small, fragile thing. He was trying to fix the cabin's door hinge, which groaned in protest every time it was moved. He was crouched, his good shoulder pressed to the wood, trying to lever it back into place. His hand slipped, and the heavy door whacked him soundly on the head. He cursed, a low, eloquent string of words that he immediately cut short, remembering she was there. Marlene, who had been watching, let out a small, choked sound. It was a laugh. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide, horrified that she had laughed at his pain. He glared at her. The old, hard Colt. The scarred side of his face was tense. She saw him fight it. And then, the good side of his mouth quirked. It was not a smile. It was the memory of one. "It ain't funny," he growled, but there was no heat in it. "It was a little funny," she whispered, smiling. He turned back to the door, his shoulders shaking just once. It was enough. They were two people, mending a broken house. The intimacy, when it happened, was as inevitable and as quiet as the coming thaw. It was not a storm of passion. It was the slow, careful melting of two frozen rivers. It was night, a deep, clear, cold night. The threat of the gang felt distant, a bad dream. The cabin was warm, the fire burning low and steady. They had finished their meal. Marlene was sitting on the bearskin rug, mending his coat, the one he had given her. He was sitting on his cot, watching her. His gaze was no longer averted. He watched her. He watched the way the firelight caught the strands of her dark hair. He watched her small, capable hands as she pulled the thread. She looked up, feeling his gaze. She did not look away. He stood, walked the few steps, and sat on the rug beside her. He did not touch her. He just sat, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "You should go back to New Orleans," he said, his voice quiet. The words were a splash of cold water. "What?" "When the thaw comes, you should go back. Clear your name. This ain't no place for you." He was offering her an escape. He was trying to be noble. She looked at him, at his face. The firelight softened the scar, turning it from a ruin into just a shadow. "And you?" she asked. "Will you go back to Wyoming? Clear your name?" "No," he said. "My name's dead. I'm dead." "Then so am I," she said, and she put down her sewing. She reached out, not with pity, not with need. She laid her hand on his arm, a simple, human touch. He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. He leaned in and kissed her. It was the kiss from the storm, the one of shared grief, but it held. It deepened. He tasted of coffee and wood smoke. She kissed him back, her fear gone, replaced by a deep, aching certainty. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. He was afraid, not of her, but of himself. "Marlene," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. "It's all right. Colt," she said. It was slow. It was clumsy. It was full of hesitation. He was a man unlearning years of self-hatred. She was a woman unlearning years of fear. He began to unbutton her shirt. His hands, so sure on a rifle, so rough with an axe, were trembling. She helped him. He touched her skin as if he expected it to burn him. And when he was bare, he tried to turn, to hide his scarred side from her in the dim light. She stopped him. She put her hand on his chest, on the knotted, ruined flesh. She leaned in, and she kissed the very edge of it, just below his collarbone. A sound broke from his throat, a low, wounded sound, and all his defenses crumbled. They made love on the old bearskin rug. It was not the taking of her husband, or the violent fantasies of the outlaws. It was a slow, emotional, and deeply human act. It was two broken, discarded things, fitting themselves together in the dark, trying to make a whole. Afterward, they lay tangled in the blankets, the firelight playing over them. He was on his back, staring at the rafters, his arm holding her close. He did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was thick, almost unrecognizable. "I never thought," he started, and had to stop. He cleared his throat. "I never thought anyone would want to see it. All of me. Not without flinching. Not ever again." He turned his head, his gray eyes bright with a moisture he fought to hold back. "I figured I'd die up here, Marlene, alone, and that'd be that." She felt her own dam break. It was not the loud sobbing of her breakdown. It was a deep, silent, shuddering release. Tears slid from her eyes, hot, into her hair, onto his shoulder. He tensed instantly, pulling back to look at her. His face was a mask of sudden fear. Did I hurt you, Marlene? I swear." "No," she choked out, shaking her head. She buried her face in his neck, right against the scarred skin. She was not hiding from it. She was holding onto it. No, oh, Colt, no! She wept. For her lost life. For her dead husband. For the men who had left her in the dirt. For her own, broken, useless past. It's just, she sobbed, trying to find the words. It has been so long, years, since I was touched. With care. Since anyone touched me like I was worth something, not just a thing to be owned or broken. He held her. He just held her. He rocked her gently, his calloused hand stroking her hair. He said nothing. He did not know the words, but his arms, the good one and the one scarred by fire, held her with a strength that was more than muscle. He held her as if she were the last good thing in the world, and he would not let her go. Miles away, in the muddy, rutted, one-street town of Red Trail, a different kind of man was reading a piece of paper. Red Trail was a town built on hope and whiskey. It had a general store, 2 saloons, and a new, humming telegraph office. Elias Thorne stood in that office, the flimsy telegram in his hand. He was a young man, not yet 30. He was clean-shaven, and his duster was clean. He did not drink. He did not gamble. He was an ambitious man, and he saw himself as an arm of righteous justice. He was, in his own mind, the New West, civilized, relentless. The telegram was from a Pinkerton agent in St. Louis. Murderous bride. New Orleans. Marlene Duval. Fled west, believed in Montana territory. Reward posted by Duval family. Substantial. Elias had been tracking a different bounty, but this was richer. He walked into the saloon, not for a drink, but for information. He laid a silver dollar on the bar. "I'm looking for news," he said to the bartender. "Stagecoach, ambushed up on the pass, a few weeks back." The bartender nodded. "Heard about it. Driver killed, woman missing, assumed dead. Or worse." "What if she wasn't?" Elias said, his voice quiet. He bought a round for a few grizzled prospectors. He asked questions. Any strangers pass through? Anyone seen a fine-spoken woman? Dark hair? Alone? They talked about the blizzard. They talked about the rising price of fur. And one of them mentioned the hermit. "No one's seen anyone, 'cept maybe Hardin, up in the Highlands." "Hardin?" "Aye, loner, trapper. Face like a dropped pie, half burnt. Comes in maybe twice a year. Trades his pelts. Don't say a word. Mean as a snake." Elias Thorne listened. He processed. A fine lady. Missing. A scarred, mean loner. Hiding in the mountains. It was a dark, simple story. He had seen it before. A woman taken. Held captive. He bought a bag of oats, 3 tins of beans, and a box of cartridges. He checked his sidearm. He was not a fool. He was righteous. And he believed, going on a rescue. He rode out of Red Trail, heading for the mountains, the telegram a promise in his pocket. The new peace in the cabin lasted 3 days. 3 days of stolen, fragile domesticity. 3 days where they were just Colt and Marlene. Then Colt went to check his snares. He came back walking fast, his face a grim, hard mask. "He's back," he said, slinging his rifle from his shoulder. "The scout, or another one. He's been closer. He's getting bold." Marlene felt the ice slide back into her stomach. That night, she lay beside him on the cot. He had insisted she take it. He slept on the rug, but she had waited until he was asleep. And then she had slipped down to lie beside him. She watched him sleep. His face, in repose, was younger, but the scar was always there, a reminder. She was poison. She had told him so. She had brought this to him. The gang, the watching men, and now, she knew, with a sick certainty, that more would come. Her name was too loud. The reward would be too high. He had built a life here, a quiet, broken life. But it was his, and she had shattered it. She had brought the world back to his door. She made her decision. She waited until the hour before dawn, the deepest, coldest part of the night. His breathing was deep. She slipped out from under the blanket. She moved with a silence she had learned from him. She pulled on the boots. She packed the small bag she had arrived with, a strip of venison, his spare knife. She wrapped her feet in extra rags for warmth. She stood. She looked at him. One last time, sleeping on the floor. Her heart felt like it was being ripped from her chest. "I am doing this to save you." She put her hand on the cold iron latch of the door. "You take one more step, and I'll break your other ankle." His voice, low and hard, came from the shadows. He was not asleep. He was sitting up on the rug, his rifle in his lap. She froze. "Colt, Where do you think you're going, Marlene?" He stood up, a tall, furious shadow against the faint embers. "I'm leaving, to draw them off. They are looking for me. Not you. I won't be the reason you're ruined again." It was the worst possible thing she could have said. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He did not grab her. He stood in front of her, so close she could feel the rage coming off him in waves. "Ruined," he hissed. The word was pure venom. "Do you think I'm not ruined already? You think this—" He gestured to his face, to the cabin. "This is some game. You think I'm a cripple, a child, hiding up here from the world?" "No," she whispered, shrinking back. "I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that was worse than his yell. He swept the tin cup from the table. It clattered violently against the log wall. "You don't get to choose for me. You don't get to ride in here, tear my life apart, and then decide what's best for me. You don't get to be the noble one." He grabbed her arm. His grip was steel. It hurt. "Colt, you're hurting me." He let go instantly, recoiling as if he'd been burned. He looked at his own hand, horrified. He turned away from her, slamming his fist into the cabin wall. The whole room shuddered. "You think I'm like him?" he whispered, his back to her. "You think I'm weak? Is that it? You think I'm just a broken thing you can pity and then throw away when it's convenient?" He spun back to face her, and his eyes were raw with a pain that went far deeper than his scars. It was the old wound, the betrayal, Boone Slater, the world leaving him for dead, and now she was doing it too. "You think I'm too broken to fight for you?" The question hung in the air, a terrible, desperate accusation. He was not asking about his strength. He was asking if she believed in him. He was accusing her of seeing him exactly as the world did, a damaged, useless man. That accusation shattered her. Her noble sacrifice was just another betrayal. "No," she wept. The bag dropped from her numb fingers. "No, I don't. I don't want them to hurt you." "And you leave and won't," he shot back. She had no answer. She collapsed. She stumbled forward, her strength gone. She fell against him, not in grace, but in a heap. She broke down, all the fear, all the guilt, all the love she felt for him. It all came out in a storm of racking, terrible sobs. She clutched the front of his shirt, burying her face against his chest. She cried into the rough wool, against the scarred, hard flesh that she had tried to protect, and in doing so, had wounded more deeply than any knife. His anger, so white-hot, vanished in an instant. It was replaced by a fierce, desperate grip. His arms came around her, crushing her to him. He held her. He held her as if she were the only thing holding him to the earth. "Damn you, Marlene!" he whispered into her hair, his voice thick. "Damn you for coming here!" But he did not let her go. He held her, his scarred face pressed against the top of her head, and in the cold, dark cabin, they stood as one, The argument was over. They would face what was coming. Together. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the melting snow running from the eaves. They stood by the door, Marlene's face still buried in his chest, his arms locked around her. The argument, the storm of her leaving, had passed. What was left was a cold, hard, shared resolve. He finally let her go, his hands resting on her shoulders. He looked down at her, his face grim, the fury replaced by a trapper's quiet focus. "All right," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You will not run. We will not run." "Colt, No, you were right," he said, cutting her off. "This is my land. This is our place. I've been run off once. I'll be damned if I'll be run off again. And I'll be damned if I let them take you." She nodded, wiping the last of the tears from her face. The weakness was gone. "What do we do?" "We get ready. We stop being the prey. We become the trap." His energy changed. The broken hermit vanished. And the foreman, the man who had once commanded 50 riders, returned. He was a man of strategy again, not just survival. "First, we buy time. We give them what they're looking for." He went to the small pile of her belongings, the few things he had salvaged from her ruined bag. He found her original boot, the one she had lost its mate to. The sole was thin, the heel worn in a distinctive way. "They're watching. They're looking for you, a woman, alone or captive. They're not looking for us." He spent an hour preparing. He took the boot. He took the tattered remains of her cloak, the one the outlaws had left behind in their haste. He cut a strip of the gray wool. He was a tracker, and he knew how to read trails. He also knew how to make them. "Bar the door behind me," he said, his rifle in his hand. "Don't open it for any sound, unless you hear me whistle. 3 times. Like a meadowlark. You hear anything else, you shoot through the door." She nodded. Her hand was steady on the carbine. "Be safe, Colt." He gave her a single, hard look. "Just be here when I get back." He slipped out into the gray, melting world. Marlene barred the heavy log across the door. She went to the small window, her rifle resting on the sill. She watched. She watched his dark form disappear into the pines, heading south, away from the cabin. He was gone for 3 hours. 3 hours of absolute, heart-stopping silence. Marlene did not sit. She did not pace. She stood at the window, then at the door, listening. The cabin, once her sanctuary, now felt like a wooden coffin. She heard the whistle. 3 high, clear notes. She tore the bar from the door. He stumbled in, covered in mud and melting snow, breathing hard. He was exhausted. "It's done," he said, leaning against the wall. "I made them a trail. A woman, alone, limping, heading south, toward the Badlands. I left this." He held up his hand. It was bleeding. He had used his own blood, mixed with snow, on the piece of gray wool he'd snagged on a thorn bush. "It's a fool's trail," he said. "But they're fools. They're lazy. They'll follow it. It'll lead them into the coulees. They'll spend a week tracking a ghost. It buys us time. Time to see who else is looking." Meanwhile, the world was, indeed, looking. Elias Thorne, the bounty hunter, had lost the trail in the storm. He had wasted 2 days in the high drifts, his horse lame. He had returned to Red Trail, his mood sour, his righteousness pricked. He was a man of the law, and he disliked being made a fool of by a half-burnt hermit. He was in the saloon, nursing a cup of coffee, when the man he had been waiting for rode into town. Boone Slater. Slater did not look like a monster. He was a big man, handsome in a broad, sun-scorched way. He wore a fine coat, and his saddle was silver inlaid. He commanded the street when he walked down it. He was the owner of the Double S Ranch, the biggest in the valley. He was, to all appearances, the very picture of Montana success. He was civilization. Elias Thorne approached him. Hat in hand, he was an employee now, not just an agent.
Mr. Slater, I lost him in the blizzard."
Boone Slater's blue eyes were as cold and bright as a glacier. He smiled, but the smile did not touch his eyes. "You lost a one-man camp in a blizzard you knew was coming. You are not impressing me. Mr. Thorne. He's not just a hermit, sir, he's Harden, cold Harden." The smile vanished. Slater's hand, which had been resting on the bar, clenched into a fist. "You are certain?"
"I am."
"He's dead," Slater said, his voice flat.
"I saw the ashes of that barn myself."
"He's alive," Thorne insisted, feeling a small surge of confidence. He had power here. "And he's not alone. That's the other thing. The woman I was tracking, a fugitive from New Orleans, Marlene Duval. She's with him. The men from the ambushed stagecoach. They left her for dead. Harden must have found her." Boone Slater was very still. He stared at Thorne, but he was not seeing him. He was seeing a ghost. Two ghosts, in the same place. The world, which he had so carefully built, suddenly seemed to be tilting. "Duval," Slater said, the name tasting strange in his mouth. He remembered. He had not always been a Montana rancher. He had been a man with ambitions that stretched from coast to coast. 5 years ago, those ambitions had taken him to New Orleans, seeking to secure shipping contracts for his cattle. He sat in the saloon in Red Trail, but in his mind, he was in a humid, gas-lit study, smelling of brandy and cigar smoke. He was talking to Gaspard Duval, a cold, precise man who had denied him. And later, he had spoken with Gaspard's sister, a woman with a bitter mouth and a consuming jealousy. Boone Slater was a man who understood leverage. He understood that every situation had a weakness, a crack. The sister wanted her brother gone. Boone wanted his shipping contract. He had not done the deed. He was not a fool, but he knew men. He knew a disgruntled valet, a man with gambling debts. Boone had facilitated. He had procured the arsenic, a simple thing, bought from an apothecary for killing rats on the new ranch. He had passed the small packet to the valet, along with a thick stack of bills. He had left New Orleans the next day, his contract secured, to be signed by the sister as soon as she took control of the estate. He had read about the murder. He had read that the young, pretty wife, Marlene, had been blamed. He had felt a small, dark flicker of amusement. It was tidy, a perfect, clean piece of business. Until now, the two loose ends of his life, the man he had left to burn, and the woman who was the only other living soul who knew he'd been in New Orleans that month. The woman who could, if she ever made the connection, destroy him, were together, in one cabin, hiding. This was not a bounty. This was an extermination. "Mr. Thorne," Slater said, his voice a silky, dangerous purr. "The Duval family is offering a substantial reward. I hear—" "Yes, sir, very substantial." "I'll double it." Thorne's eyes widened. "I want that woman," Slater said. "She is a murderer. She has, it seems, allied herself with a known thief and arsonist. We cannot have that kind of element in this valley. It's bad for business." He smiled again. "You find that cabin, Mr. Thorne. You bring her to me, alive. I want to question her myself. As for Harden, just make sure he doesn't walk away this time. I'll pay a bonus for the thief's head." Elias Thorne, righteous agent of the law, nodded. He was now a killer for hire, but the money was good, and the man he was hunting was, after all, a wanted criminal. It was, he told himself, still justice. Back in the cabin, the thaw was accelerating. The world was turning to a brown, sloppy mud. The river was a gray, roaring torrent. Travel was now possible. The waiting was the hardest part. They were prisoners of the melting snow. "We have to move," Colt said one evening. The tension was making him pace. a caged wolf. The trail I laid, it won't fool them for long. Not once a real tracker gets on it. And Slater, he'll hire a real tracker. Marlene was cleaning the carbine. The motion's now second nature. Where? North, the border. It's less than 50 miles. We cross into Canada. They don't look for dead men up there. We can find a new place, a new name. We can start over. He was offering her the one thing she had never thought to have. A future. A life. She paused, the oily rag in her hand. She looked at him. His face was earnest, afraid. He was offering her the thing he thought she wanted, escape. She thought of New Orleans. She thought of the courtroom she had fled. She thought of the stagecoach. She thought of the name Eliza Hale. She had been running her entire life. No, she said. His face fell. It was a look of such profound hurt. It was worse than his anger. What do you mean? No? Marlene, they are not playing. Slater will send men. He will kill us both. And I am tired of running from men, she said. She stood up, her voice quiet, but with a core of steel he had never heard before. I ran from my husband's family. I ran from the trial. I ran from those men at the stagecoach. I was going to run from you. All I have ever done is run.
This is different. This is survival.
Is it? She said, her gaze sharp. Or is it just running? But with you this time. They called me a murderer, Colt, and they called you a thief. If we run to Canada, if we hide under a new name, we are telling them they were right. We are agreeing to be the ghosts they tried to make us. He stared at her, uncomprehending. This isn't a courtroom. This is Montana. There is no truth here. There is just who is fast and who is dead. Then I want to be fast, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I want to stand, for me, and for you. You said this was your land. I will not be run off it. We will not be run off it. I would rather die here, as Marlene Duval, on my feet, than live 100 years in Canada as nobody. He searched her face. He saw no fear. He saw no weakness. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman who had been forged in the storm. She was not just his partner. She was his spine. He let out a long breath and slowly, he nodded. A small, proud smile touched the good side of his face. All right, he said. All right. Marlene, we stand? The confrontation came 3 days later. It was not the army that Boone Slater had promised. It was one man. A horse whinnied, sharp and close. Colt was at the window in an instant. One rider, clean coat, clean hat. He's not from the gang. The bounty hunter, Marlene whispered. She felt her blood turn to ice. Colt grabbed his rifle. Stay away from the window. Bar the door. He's mine. No, Marlene said. She picked up the carbine.
He's here for me. We do this together.
They stood on either side of the door, their backs to the log walls. A mirror image. 2 hunted animals, finally at bay. Hello, the cabin, a voice called out. It was a clear, confident voice, a voice used to being obeyed. I'm looking for a Mrs. Eliza Hale. I'm an agent of the law, and I'm here to offer assistance. Colt growled, low in his throat. Go to hell! The voice outside paused. The politeness vanished. I know you are in there, Hardin, and I know you have her. I am Elias Thorne. Send the woman out, unharmed, and you might live to see a trial. Colt raised his rifle, aiming it at the thick oak of the door. You've got 10 seconds to ride, or I'll see how good that coat is at stopping a bullet. Wait, Marlene whispered, her mind racing. She put her hand on his arm. Marlene, no, this is my fight. He thinks I'm a victim, she said, her voice sharp. He thinks you're a monster. Let him keep thinking it, but let him see me. Before Colt could object, she put her hand on the heavy bar. Colt, no, she said, her voice commanding. She was not asking. She unbarred the door and swung it wide open. Elias Thorne was 20 yards out, sitting on a fine bay horse. His hand was resting on his holstered pistol. He was smiling, a small, righteous, satisfied smile. He saw her, ragged, in men's clothes, her hair wild, a perfect captive. "Mrs. Duval," he said, his voice soft, reassuring. "Thank God, you are safe. I am here to take you away from this animal. Do not be afraid." He began to swing his leg over the saddle to dismount. "Stay right where you are," Marlene said. Her voice was not a plea. It was not a whisper. It was a command. It was as cold and clear as the mountain air. Elias froze, his leg half off the horse. His smile faltered. Before he could process, before his hand could even twitch toward his gun, Marlene raised the carbine. Colt, still inside, had his own rifle up, but he held his fire. This was her play. She did not aim for his chest. She did not aim for his head. She aimed for the pommel of his saddle. She squeezed the trigger. The boom of the rifle shattered the clearing. Elias Thorne screamed, a high, thin sound. He fell backward off his horse, landing in the mud. He hadn't been hit, but the bullet had passed so close to his hip it had torn his duster. It had taken a chunk of wood and leather from his saddle horn. It had been a shot of impossible, contemptuous skill. He lay in the mud, staring. Colt stepped out of the cabin, his own rifle aimed steady at Elias's chest. "She's a better shot than I am," Colt growled, the lie smooth and terrible. "And she ain't as patient. Get up! Slow!" Elias Thorne scrambled to his feet, his hands high. His face was pale. The righteousness was gone. This was not the plan. This was not a frightened woman and a burnt-up thief. These were something else. Marlene walked onto the porch. She did not raise the rifle again. She just held it, balanced on her hip. She was the one in charge. "You have a choice, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice as flat as a blade. "You can get on your horse. You can ride back to Red Trail. You tell Boone Slater you found this cabin. You tell him the hermit was here, but the woman was already dead. The blizzard, the spring thaw, it took the grave. You tell him there is nothing here for him. You tell him the case is closed." "I cannot," Elias stammered, his eyes on Colt's rifle. "The law. My duty." "That is your first choice," Marlene cut him off, her voice dropping. "Your second choice is that you stay. We'll bury you right where you stand. And no one will ever know what happened to you. No one will ever find you. Choose." Elias looked from Marlene's cold, dead eyes to Colt's scarred, furious face. He saw two people who had already died once. They had nothing left to lose. His civilized world, his commissions, his starched collars. It was all a joke. He backed away, his hands still raised. He grabbed his horse's rein. He clumsy, terrified. He pulled himself into the saddle. He did not look back. He kicked the horse into a frantic, muddy gallop, crashing through the trees, fleeing back toward the world he understood. They stood for a long time, just watching him go. The clearing was silent again. Colt slowly lowered his rifle. He looked at Marlene. He was not smiling. He was in awe. He had seen her terror. He had seen her grief. Now, he was seeing her. That night, the air was sharp and cold, but the earth was bare. The last of the snow had melted. Marlene went to her small, tattered bag. From the bottom, she pulled the last relic of her old life, the gray wool dress. It was stiff with mud and dried blood. It was the uniform of her victimhood. Colt watched her. He knew what she was doing. He said nothing. He built a small fire in the clearing, a few yards from the cabin. The flames snapped in the cold air. Marlene walked to the fire. She was wearing his shirt. It was too large. The sleeves rolled up, but it was clean. She was wearing a pair of his old trousers, tucked into the boots he had given her. She was the woman of this place. She held the dress in her hands. She looked at it. It was her shame. It was her fear. It was her running. It was New Orleans. It was the carriage. It was the man Jeb's laugh. She threw it into the fire. The wool smoked, sizzled, and then, with a whoosh, it caught. The flames leaped up, bright orange against the deep, purple twilight. Colt came and stood beside her. He did not put his arm around her. He did not touch her. He just stood watch, a silent guardian. They stood together and watched it burn. They watched the fine wool, the mark of her old life, curl and blacken. They watched the bloodstains turn to ash. They watched her past disintegrate, the embers floating up like dark stars into the vast, cold Montana sky. She stood bathed in the firelight, his shirt flapping in the night wind. She was not shivering. The wind blew a strand of dark hair across her face, and she did not brush it away. She just watched, her face calm and set, until there was nothing left but a glowing pile of cinders. She was no longer running. She was home. Boone Slater rode his horse like he owned the ground it walked on. He sat in his silver-inlaid saddle, a big man in a clean duster, and surveyed the small, empty cabin. Behind him, 2 ranch hands, hard men with dull eyes and rifles resting easy on their hips, fanned out. "He ain't here." One of the men, a man named Taggart, grunted, kicking open the cabin door. "I can see that," Slater said, his voice a low, impatient purr. He dismounted, his blue eyes taking in everything, the dead ashes of the fire pit where the dress had burned, the empty shelves, the bare cot. Thorne said this was the place. "He's run, like the coward he is," Taggart said, spitting. "No." Slater ran a gloved finger along the door jamb. "He hasn't run. He's moved. This place was a trap. He knew we were coming. He's dug in." He looked up at the high, rocky ridges that ringed the small valley. "He's watching us, right now." He was right. 500 yards up, concealed by a curtain of ancient ivy and a jumble of gray boulders, was the mouth of a cave. From within, Marlene held her breath. She lay on her stomach, the cold stone of the ledge biting through her shirt. Beside her, Colt watched his enemy through the sights of his rifle. "That's him," he whispered, his voice devoid of all emotion. "That's Boone Slater." Marlene studied the man. He was handsome, confident, the picture of a civilized rancher. He was nothing like the monster she had imagined. He was worse. He was a man who looked in the mirror and saw a hero. "And the other 2? "Hired guns, Taggart and a mean one called Pike. They work for his brand. They were there, that night. They held me down." Marlene's hand tightened on the stock of her own carbine. "You can't take all 3. Colt, not from here. They're too far, and they'll scatter." "I know." His finger rested on the trigger, the tension in his body a coiled spring. She could feel the hatred coming off him, a dry, burning heat. He wanted to pull that trigger. He wanted to end it. But he did not. He let out a long, slow breath and lowered the rifle. The foreman, the strategist, took over. "They'll search," he said. "They'll split up, but Slater, he's arrogant. He won't look long. He'll set a trap of his own. He'll wait. He thinks I'm just an animal. He'll hunt me like one." They had moved to the cave 2 days ago, just after burning the dress. It was Colt's old hunting blind, a deep, dry fissure in the rock he had used for years. It was defensible. It had a small spring-fed seep in the back for water and a narrow chimney in the rock to let smoke out. Invisible from below, they had hauled their meager supplies up the steep deer trail. The flour, the salt, the ammunition, the blankets. They were now in their fortress, waiting. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Night fell. Down below, Slater and his men made a cold camp. They were too smart to light a fire. The 3 of them settled in the shelter of the empty cabin, their horses tethered. They were waiting for the animal to get curious. to sneak back. In the cave, it was utterly dark. Colt and Marlene lay side by side, wrapped in the same blankets, their rifles beside them. They did not sleep. They spoke in whispers, their breath pluming in the cold air.
"Colt,"
she whispered, staring into the blackness.
After this, if there is an after."
He was silent for a moment.
"There will be."
"What will you do? Will you stay here?" He shifted, his arm brushing her.
"I can't, not now. This place, it's got a stain on it, just like my name. He's seen it, he's touched it. It's poisoned, same as you said about yourself."
"Then we go north, to Canada?" she asked, a hollow feeling in her chest. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but fierce. "We won't be run off. You were right, we stand, and when this is done, and he is gone, we start over."
"Start over?"
She felt him turn toward her in the dark. She could feel his scarred face just inches from hers. I've been thinking about what you said, about my name. Maybe a name ain't a thing that can be burned. Maybe it's just a thing you build like a house." He paused, and she could hear the vulnerability, the fear of a man daring to dream for the first time in years.
"There's a valley, up north, near the Flathead. I saw it once, years ago, before. It's green, good water, good timber.
A man could build a ranch there, a proper one, not a shack to hide in, a home with cattle and horses." His voice was so low, she could barely hear him. "I used to dream about it before, but I was just dreaming for myself, and that dream died in the fire."
"Colt." "It's back, Marlene,"
he whispered, and his hand, calloused and rough, found hers in the dark.
His grip was tight, desperate. "But it ain't the same. It's not for me. It's for us. I see the house, but you're on the porch. I see the horses, but you're riding the best one. I don't want to be a hermit anymore. I want to build a life with you."
Tears welled in her eyes. Hot and silent, he was offering her everything, a home, a future, a name. His.
"I would like that. Colt Hardin,"
she whispered. "I would like that very much." He squeezed her hand. "Then that's what we're fighting for, not just to live. We're fighting for that porch." The next morning, Colt was gone before dawn.
"I have to set the trap,"
he had whispered, kissing her forehead.
"Thorn is still out there. I know it. He's the weak link."
"Colt, no, let me come." "No, you are the defender. I am the hunter. They'll be watching the cave. They won't be watching their backs. Bar the entrance." He had packed a small stone in the fissure they used as a door. It was heavy, secure. She was alone, in the dark, with her rifle and her fear. Colt moved like a ghost. He circled wide, a mile east, coming up behind Slater's camp. He did not go near it. He went looking for the fourth man. He found him, just as he knew he would. Elias Thorne had not fled. He was camped a mile downriver, in a miserable, wet hollow. His fire was smoky. He was terrified of Slater. But he was more terrified of returning with a story of such complete and utter failure. He was a man trapped between two nightmares. Colt did not announce himself. He simply appeared. Thorne was squatting by his pitiful fire, trying to boil coffee. He looked up, and his face went white. He scrambled for his pistol. Colt's boot was on his wrist before he could clear the holster. He pressed down. There was a small, sick crack of bone. Thorne screamed. "You scream again," Colt said, his voice a dead, cold calm. "And I'll cut your tongue out." He kicked the pistol away. Thorne cradled his broken wrist, whimpering. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Thorne, but you're a sloppy camper."
Please,
Thorn begged, his eyes wide with terror.
please, I won't tell him. I'll go, I swear I'll go.
Yes, you will go, Colt said. He knelt, his face inches from the bounty hunters. You'll go right back to your boss, Boone Slater, and you'll deliver a message. From me.
He'll kill me.
I'll kill you right here, Colt countered. At least he'll pay for your funeral. Thorn's resolve crumbled.
What? What message?
You found me. You found the cave. You're a hero. You got in a fight. I shot you. Colt picked up Thorn's own pistol. He checked the load. What? No, please. Colt fired. The bullet tore a furrow through the fleshy part of Thorn's thigh. It was a searing, bloody, but non-lethal wound. Thorn howled, collapsing. Colt stood over him. You're limping now, just like the outline says. Makes the story better. You tell him I'm in the cave. You tell him the woman's with me. You tell him I'm wounded, my leg. You tell him I'm low on ammunition, and I'm ready to make a deal. He can have the woman for his bounty. He just has to let me go. He won't believe it, Thorn panted, clutching his bleeding leg. He will, Colt said, because he's arrogant. He believes I'm a coward. He believes I'm a thief. He'll believe I'd sell her. He'll want to be there himself to see me crawl.
Now, get up.
Get. Colt hauled the man to his feet, ripped a strip from the Thorn's own blanket, and tied a crude tourniquet around his leg. He shoved him toward his horse. You ride, mister. Thorn. You tell him, or I will find you, and next time I won't miss. Thorn, sobbing, bloody, and broken, hauled himself into his saddle and rode toward Slater's camp. Colt watched him go. The bait was set. An hour later, Marlene, from her post in the cave, saw the rider approach Slater's camp. She saw Thorn, half falling from his horse. She saw Slater and his men gather. She saw shouting, pointing. And then she saw them, all four of them, riding hard. Not for the decoy trail, not for the Badlands. They were riding straight for the cave.
Colt,
she hissed, scrambling back from the opening. He was already there, at the back of the cave, checking his rifle. I'm here. They took it. All four of them. Good. All in one place. His face was a hard, grim mask. Get to the back. Stay by the chimney. No matter what happens, you stay there. The riders stopped at the base of the deer trail, 100 yards down. Hardin! Slater's voice boomed, echoing off the rocks. Colt Hardin! You damned burnt-up ghost! Your little messenger told me everything. You're hurt. You're done. Send the woman out. Send her out. And I'll let you crawl away and die in a hole. You thief! Colt and Marlene said nothing. They lay flat, their rifles pointing through two small, natural cracks in the rock. No? You want to be proud? Slater laughed. The sound was just as Colt had described it. Loud, confident. All right, Pike, Taggart. He's in that hole. Let's smoke the rat out. Marlene saw one of the men, Taggart, dismount. He had a bundle of dry brush. He began piling it at the base of the trail. Colt, they're starting a fire, she said, her voice tight. I see it. They think they can smoke us out the front. They don't know about the chimney. He sighted down his rifle. But I can't let him light it. Colt fired. The shot was a flat crack that echoed a dozen times. Taggart cried out and grabbed his arm, a dark stain spreading on his sleeve. He dropped the brush and scrambled back. Damn you! Slater roared. He and Pike returned fire. Bullets pinged and whined off the rock face, sending stinging chips of stone into the cave. Marlene squeezed her own eyes shut, firing her carbine toward the flash of their guns. It was blind, desperate. Save your shots, Colt yelled over the din. Wait for a target. Slater was smarter than he looked. They can't cover both sides. Pike, get around the west ridge. Keep him busy. Taggart, you're bleeding. You get that fire lit. I don't care how. Light it. The standoff was on. For 10 minutes, it was a deafening chaos. Pike had found a high angle, and his bullets were getting deeper. Closer. Colt was pinned, forced to fire back, to keep the man from getting a clear shot. Below, Taggart, his arm bleeding, had managed to crawl forward. He threw a lit match into the brush. The fire caught. It was dry, seasoned wood. It went up with a whoosh, but it was not just brush. Taggart threw on green pine boughs. Thick, acrid, choking smoke began to pour from the bundle. It was not a fire to burn them. It was a fire to suffocate them. The wind was blowing directly into the mouth of the cave. The smoke hit them in a wave. It was oily, stinging. Marlene's eyes teared instantly. She began to cough, a deep, racking cough. "The chimney!" Colt yelled, grabbing her arm. "Go! Get to the back! Breathe from the vent!" "Colt, no, I won't leave you." "Go!" he roared. The smoke was thicker now, turning the gray light black. "I have to keep them from coming up. I have to draw their fire." He pushed her toward the back of the cave. She stumbled, falling to her knees, crawling toward the small crack in the ceiling where a thin, clean line of daylight cut through. Colt turned back to the mouth of the cave. The smoke was an impassable, burning wall. He could not see. He could not breathe. "He's pinned, boss," Pike yelled from the ridge. "Good," Slater shouted, his voice thick with triumph. "They're choking. Now, Taggart, with me. We're going up. We're going to drag him out by his burnt hide." Colt heard them. He heard the scrape of boots on the trail. They were coming. He had one chance. He grabbed his rifle. He held his breath, and he ran. He burst out of the smoke-filled mouth of the cave, his eyes streaming, his lungs on fire. He was a perfect target against the black plume. "There!" Pike screamed. A rifle cracked. Colt felt a white-hot hammer slam into his left thigh. His leg buckled. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, and fell, tumbling from the ledge. He rolled, crashing down the first 10 feet of the trail, landing in a heap on a small outcrop, his rifle clattering just out of reach. He looked down. His leg was a ruin. Blood was pumping, dark and fast, from a terrible wound. He looked up. Boone Slater was standing on the trail just above him, his pistol in his hand. Taggart was right behind him. Slater was smiling. "Well, well," Slater purred, walking down to stand over him. "Look at you, just like old times. Colt, on the ground, bleeding. It's a good look for you." Marlene, at the back of the cave, heard the shot. She heard Colt scream. It was a sound that stopped her heart. She did not think. She did not plan. She grabbed her carbine and scrambled back through the smoke, which was beginning to thin as the fire below died to embers. She got to the mouth of the cave. She saw Taggart and Slater, their backs to her, standing over Colt. She raised her rifle. Taggart heard her, and he turned. She fired. The bullet hit him high in the chest. He looked surprised. He sat down, hard, then fell over sideways off the path. Slater spun, his pistol firing wildly. The bullet whined past Marlene's ear. She ducked back into the cave. "You!" Slater roared, his voice no longer triumphant, but filled with a sudden animal rage. He was alone. His men were down. He looked at Colt, bleeding on the rock. He looked up at the cave. "Fine," he bellowed. "I'll come and get you myself, you murdering—" But he did not. He was a rancher, not a fool. He would not charge a dark hole. Marlene heard him scramble down the path. She heard his horse, neighing. She heard him ride off. She crawled to Colt. His face was gray. He's gone," she panted, her hands fluttering over the terrible wound. "No," Colt gasped, his teeth gritted. He's not running. He's cutting me off. He knows I can't."
I can't climb down. He's going to the forest, the easy way up, to trap you."
Marlene looked at the wound. So much blood. She tore a strip from her own shirt, packing it tight. "Colt, I have to stop the bleeding." "No," he said, grabbing her arm. His grip was weak, but his eyes were burning. You run. He's after you, Marlene. You lure him away to the ravine, the North Ravine." "No, I won't leave you." You wanted to stand, didn't you?" he gasped, a bloody froth on his lips. "This is it. This is the stand. I can't fight him." "But you can. You can outthink him. The ravine. Go! I'll follow." She looked at him, his life's blood staining the rock. She looked at the forest, where a killer was waiting. She kissed him, a hard, fast, desperate kiss. "Liv, Colt, you promised me a porch." She grabbed her rifle. She scrambled to the back of the cave, to the chimney vent. It was a tight, vertical crawl. She clawed her way up, emerging onto the high ridge. She stood for a second, took a deep breath of clean, cold air, and then she ran. She ran through the forest, heading north, making just enough noise. She heard him, behind her, crashing through the brush. He was faster than she was. He was fueled by rage. "I hear you, you witch!" he roared. She ran until her lungs burned. The ravine, the place Colt had showed her, a deep, 50-foot drop to a rocky, dry riverbed. She got to the edge and looked back. He was there. He burst from the trees, not 50 yards away. He stopped, raising his rifle. He was grinning. He had her. Marlene raised her own, but she was shaking. Her arms were weak. She was a novice, and he was a professional. He cornered her. She was trapped, her back to the empty air. "It's over," Slater said, walking toward her, his rifle steady. "All this trouble, for a burnt-up thief and a lying. I should have known. That night, in New Orleans, I saw your picture on your husband's desk. You had defiant eyes." Marlene's mind reeled.
"New Orleans? You knew Gaspard?"
"I did," Slater said, his smile widening. He was savoring this. "I knew his sister, too, a very accommodating woman. It was my arsenic. Did you know that? My final contribution to your marriage. And here you are, all the loose ends, in one place." He had just confessed. He had just cleared her name to the empty trees. He raised his pistol. "It's a shame. You and Colt, you could have just died. Now, I have to make you dead." "No," a voice croaked. Slater turned. Colt was leaning against a tree, 10 yards away. He was a ghost. He was white, soaked in blood. His left leg was useless. He was holding his rifle, but it was shaking so badly he could barely aim it. He must have crawled. He had dragged himself, bleeding, through the forest. Slater laughed. It was a full, rich, booming laugh. "Ah, look at you," he mocked. "You can't even stand. You really are a fool. Hardin, you were a fool to trust me. You were a fool to fight me. And you're a fool to die for her." You talk too much, Boone," Colt whispered. He tried to raise the rifle. It wavered. Slater turned his pistol from Marlene to Colt. It was an easy shot. "Goodbye, Colt. Say hello to hell." He fired, but Marlene had moved. The instant Slater turned, she had lunged, not at him, but at Colt. She slammed into Colt's chest, pushing him flat as the bullet cracked through the air where his head had been. Colt fell backward, landing hard. Slater, his shot missed, spun back to Marlene. But Colt, on his back, his rifle now braced against the ground, his body in agony, had his target. He was not shaking. He was steady. Slater was just a dark shape against the sky, a shape that needed to be erased. Colt squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The sound was flat, final. Boone Slater stopped. He looked down. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on his clean duster, right over his heart. He looked up, his eyes wide with a profound, animal surprise. He said. He fell. He did not fall backward. He fell forward, his own momentum carrying him over the edge of the ravine. He tumbled, a loose, broken thing, into the rocks below. Silence. There was only the sound of the wind in the pines and the sound of Colt's ragged, painful breathing. Marlene crawled to him. He had not moved. His eyes were closed.
Colt,
she whispered, touching his face. His eyes opened. They were pale, but they were clear.
Told you,
he gasped.
I'd follow.
He looked past her, toward the ravine.
Is he? He's gone,
Marlene said.
He's dead at last.
They stayed there, her holding him. As the sun began to set, it took an hour of pain and gritting teeth and her strength, but she got him to his feet. They half walked, half crawled back to the cave. They left Slater's body in the ravine. They left Taggart on the path. Pike was gone, having fled when he heard the final shot. They collapsed inside the cave, Marlene tending to Colt's leg in the fading light. She packed the wound. She bound it tight. He was weak, his fever already starting. She went back out to get his rifle. As she stood on the ledge, a single, perfect, white flake of snow drifted down, and then another, and another. It was starting to snow again. She went back into the cave, to the man who was her life, and she stood watch at the entrance. They would not bury the dead. The snow would do it for them. The snow would cover the blood. It would cover the tracks. It would cover the past, and leave the world white, and clean, and new. The snow that had buried Boone Slater and his man did not last. A new, wet snow followed, a heavy blanket that sealed the high country. Winter, in its final, dying rage, held them in the cave for another 3 weeks. Colt did not die. He came close. The fever took him. He was no longer the strong, quiet man who had pulled her from the ice. He was a child, raving in the dark, his hands flailing. He was back in the burning barn, his voice a raw, cracked scream, begging a man named Boone for mercy, begging for the fire to stop. Marlene became his anchor. She was the hunter, the nurse, the guardian. The terror of her old life was a distant memory. This, she found, was what she was made for.
Not for drawing rooms, but for this, for the fight.
She would hold him down when the nightmares came. She would pin his arms, her face close to his, and speak his name, her voice a steady, calm command in the dark. Colt, Colt, I am here. You are safe. It is Marlene. You are safe. She was the hunter now. She took the carbine and his snares. She learned the silence of the snow, the patience of a predator. She brought back rabbits, a ptarmigan. She was clumsy at first, her hands shaking as she reset the traps. But she was desperate, and desperation, she learned, was a sharp and effective teacher. She cleaned the wound. The bullet had torn through the thick muscle of his thigh, shattering the bone. It was a terrible, weeping thing. She had no whiskey, only boiled snow water and linen strips torn from the last of her old chemise. He would pass out from the pain of the cleaning, and she would weep silently, her tears hot on her own cold hands. Then she would bind it tight and go back out to hunt. She saw the raw strength of his body. It fought, it refused to die. The fever broke on a night when the wind finally, mercifully, stopped howling. He woke in the dark, the sweat on his body cold. His eyes were clear. He saw her, asleep, her head on his chest, her hand still holding a wet cloth. He saw the exhaustion carved into her face, the new, hard lines around her mouth.
He was alive, and she had done it.
When the true spring came, it was not a thaw, it was a flood. The world turned to mud. The river, which had been a frozen, silent thing, became a roaring, brown beast. The ice on the banks broke apart with sounds like cannon fire, a celebration of the end. Colt could stand. He was thin, a gaunt shadow of the man he had been. He put his weight on his left leg. His good hand braced against the cave wall. His face went white. He did not cry out, but a low groan was forced from his chest. The leg was healed, but it was not healed right. The bone had knitted, but it was shorter, the knee stiff and unbending. "A limp," he said, his voice flat. He had survived, but he was, in his mind, broken again. A cripple. Marlene, who had been building up the fire, stood. She walked to him. She did not coddle him. She did not offer pity. She stood in front of him, her eyes level with his. "It is a walk," she said, her voice firm. "It is the walk of a man who stood his ground when others ran. It is the walk of the man who saved me. I will see no shame in it." He looked at her, this strange, hard woman she had become. He saw no pity in her eyes, only a fierce, shared pride. He nodded. Once. They left the cave. They left the old shack, with its memories of siege and death. They did not go to the ravine to look at the bones of Boone Slater. The past was done. The spring rains and the hungry animals had already reclaimed it. They moved 1/2 mile downriver, to a wide, flat clearing Colt had always known. It was sheltered from the wind by a stand of tall cottonwoods, with a clear, open view of the water and the mountains beyond. And they began to build. It was the slowest, hardest work of their lives. Colt could no longer climb. He could not lift the heaviest logs. His new body was a source of constant, dull pain and furious frustration. He sat on a stump, his bad leg propped up, and he directed. He became the foreman once more. He taught her. He showed her how to notch the logs, how to use a lever to move twice her weight. He showed her how to mix a daubing of clay and river moss that would set like stone, sealing the cracks against any future wind. He, who had been a man of action, became a man of hands. He sat and carved shingles, one by one, his knife blade flashing. He built a door, a real door, with wooden hinges so perfectly balanced they swung smooth and silent. He built a window frame. She was his legs. She was his strength. She did the heavy lifting, straining until her muscles burned. She felt her body change. Her hands, once soft, were now a map of calluses. Her shoulders, once delicate, were broad and strong. She was, she thought with a dark smile, no longer a lady. She was a builder. They worked in a comfortable, practiced silence. It was a partnership that needed no words. He would point, she would lift, he would chisel, she would hammer. It took a month. The shack rose, log by log. It was not a hermit's hole, a place to hide. It was a house. It had 2 rooms, a solid stone hearth, and a floor of smooth, sawn planks. And it had a porch. It was not a grand porch, not the New Orleans gallery she had known. It was a small, 3-plank porch, just wide enough for 2 people to stand. When it was done, they stood before it. Colt leaned on the rough-hewn crutch he had made. He looked at the house. He looked at Marlene, her hair tied back, a smudge of mud on her jaw. "That porch," he whispered, his voice thick. It needs a chair." With the house built, the ghosts of their other lives returned, not as threats, but as obligations. "Slater," Marlene said one evening. They were sitting on the new porch, watching the river flow by. He confessed. He said, "It was my arsenic. To the trees, to me, to you." Colt nodded. He was whittling a small, intricate shape, a bird. "I heard him." "But it is just his word, and he is dead. My name, it is still ruined." "No," Colt said. He stopped whittling. He looked at her, his pale eyes serious. "Before the big snow, the one that buried him, I went back. I had to be sure he was gone. Colt, you were half dead. You had a fever.
I was angry,
He corrected, his voice a low rumble.
Anger's a better fuel than fever. I crawled down there. I went through his pockets.
A dead man don't need his things. He reached into the cabin, pulling his old saddlebag from a peg. From it, he took a small, leather-bound book. It was a pocket ledger, stained with water and something dark. He was a businessman, Colt said, his voice filled with a cold, pure contempt. He wrote everything down, expenses, debts, sins. He opened it, his finger, rough and scarred, traced a line of neat, confident script. Marlene leaned in. March 1877. New Orleans. Travel. $50. Hotel, $12. Valet payment, G.D. matter, $300. Arsenic, $1. Marlene stared. It was there. Her entire life, ruined. Her name destroyed. Her future stolen, all summarized in a $1 entry.
I have to go,
she said, her voice quiet. He just nodded.
I know. Red Trail.
The journey was 2 days. He could not ride that far, not yet. She would go alone. She rode the sturdy mule he used for packing, his rifle in a scabbard on the saddle. She was not the woman who had arrived in a rattling stagecoach, her clothes torn. She rode into Red Trail with her head high. She wore trousers and his old coat. The men in the street, the same ones who had whispered about the hermit, stared at this new woman. They saw the rifle. They saw the cold, steady look in her eyes. They moved out of her way. She walked into the telegraph office. The same operator was there. He did not recognize her. She did not send a telegram. She bought a heavy envelope and postage. She wrote a long, detailed letter to a lawyer in New Orleans, a man her father had once trusted, a man she prayed was still honorable. She explained everything. She tore the pages from Boone Slater's ledger. She signed it, not with fear, but with a cold, clear anger. Marlene Duval. She posted the letter. She bought flour, salt, coffee, and 2 new, sharp axes. She rode back to the cabin, and they waited. They waited for 6 weeks. The spring turned to a warm, glorious early summer. The valley was exploding with green. The river was calm and blue. Their new life settled. Colt's leg healed into a permanent, stiff limp. He threw away the crutch and walked with a cane. Then, with nothing, he learned to ride again, mounting his horse from the right side, a grimace of pain his only complaint. He taught her to fish. They sat on the riverbank for hours, not speaking, just being. They were a scarred, quiet pair. They were, in a way they had never thought possible, happy. The telegraph operator sent a boy. The boy, a freckled youth of 15, was terrified to ride into the highlands, to the cabin of the burnt hermit who had supposedly killed 3 men. He left the message in a cleft stick on the main trail, a mile downriver. Colt found it on his way back from checking his new snares. It was a single, yellow envelope, addressed to Mrs. Marlene Duval, care of Red Trail, Montana Territory. He rode back to the cabin. Marlene was on the porch, mending his shirt. She looked up and saw the envelope in his hand. She stood, her sewing falling to her lap. He handed it to her. His hand was steady, but his eyes were not. He knew this was the end, one way or another. Marlene's hands were shaking. She, who had faced down a bounty hunter, who had killed a man to save another, who had gutted a fish and built a wall, was terrified of this flimsy piece of paper. She opened it. It was from her lawyer. Ledger received. Stop. Valet found in St. Louis. Stop. Confessed. Stop. Slater sister arrested. Stop. Husband's family in ruin. Stop. Your name cleared. Stop. Your inheritance restored. Stop. You are a wealthy woman. Stop. Please come home. She read it. She read it again. She was free. She was rich. She was innocent. She looked up. Colt had turned. He was standing by the hearth, his back to her. He was staring into the cold, empty fireplace. He was not looking at her. He had not said a word. She looked around the small, perfect cabin, the rough-hewn table he had built, the 2 tin cups, side by side, the bearskin rug, now in front of their hearth, the smell of pine and wood smoke and coffee, the hard, clean, true life they had built with their own hands. She looked at his back, the way his shoulders were set, braced for the blow. He was giving her the choice. He was letting her go. He, who had been abandoned and betrayed by everyone he had ever trusted, was preparing to be abandoned again because he loved her. She hesitated. She thought of New Orleans, the silks, the music, the warm, jasmine-scented air, the respect, to be Mrs. Duval again, to have people bow, to walk on carpets, not on dirt floors, to be clean again. She looked at Colt's scarred hand, resting on the stone of the fireplace he had built. She folded the telegram very slowly. She walked across the room. He heard her. He flinched, a small, tight movement, but he did not turn. She stood behind him. She slid her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his strong, solid back. She felt the rigid tension in his muscles, a man bracing for a bullet. "Well?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. He could not keep the fear out of it. "They want me to come home," she whispered against his shirt. He said nothing. His body was a wall of stone. She turned him, her hands on his arms, forcing him to face her. She looked up into his pale, terrified eyes. She saw the scar, the mark of his past. She saw the limp, the mark of their battle. She kissed him. It was not the desperate kiss of the storm, or the emotional release of their first night. It was a kiss of quiet, absolute, and final promise. It was slow, and it was deep. A kiss that said this. She pulled back, her hands on his face, her thumbs tracing the good skin and the bad, the line of his jaw. "I choose this," she whispered. He still looked lost. "Marlene, you're rich, you're free. You don't have to be this life, this ruined. Ruin me, then," she said, her voice fierce, a fire in her eyes. "I choose this. I choose the dirt floor. I choose the river. I choose the limp, and I choose the scar." She put her hand on his chest, over his heart. "I choose this, even if it ruins me all over again." The tension did not just break, it evaporated. The breath he had been holding for 6 weeks, for 10 years, rushed out of him in a shudder. He grabbed her. He lifted her off the floor, his face buried in her neck, his arms locked around her. He was not a quiet man. He was a man who had seen his dream die in a fire, and then had just watched it be born again, solid and real, in his own arms. That night was not like the others. He built a fire outside, not a small, hidden fire, but a great, crackling celebration against the wind. The passion was not clumsy. It was not hesitant. It was a raw, joyful, and complete knowing. They came together not as 2 broken pieces fitting, but as one whole. It was a claiming. It was a promise made not in words, but in flesh. Afterward, they lay on the blankets, wrapped together, the fire painting them in light. They did not talk about New Orleans. They did not talk about Boone Slater. They talked about the color of the horses they would buy. They talked about the name of the ranch. He held her, his hands spread wide on her back, as if to prove she was real. They looked up. The sky above the highlands was a vast, aching black, so clear and cold it hurt to look. It was full of stars, 1,000,000, trillion stars, a spray of diamond dust so thick it looked like a tear in the fabric of the night. In the last scene, weeks later, the sun was setting, the summer was high and warm. They stood on the porch, their porch. Colt leaned against a post, his bad leg propped up on the railing. He was at peace. Marlene stood beside him, her arm looped through his, her head resting on his scarred shoulder. In the distance, down in the valley, a small line of riders, tiny as insects, moved along the river. They were just people, prospectors, or settlers, or perhaps even lawmen, heading west. Marlene and Colt watched them. They did not move. They did not reach for their rifles. They were not hiding. The riders passed, disappearing into the purple haze of the horizon. They were part of the world, but they were not their world. Colt turned his head and kissed the top of her hair. She smiled, turning her face up to his. They were free. They were scarred. They were in love. Thank you for listening to our story. Please comment where you are listening from to connect with others. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts.